Hey guys, so I'm sure most of you heard that Konami will be releasing the ban list on this Saturday, August 31st, which, by the way, I'm going to have to react in a parked car somewhere because I'm going to be out all day that day. But nonetheless, I thought I'd maybe take to Twitter and also just ask my friends as well in terms of, what are some changes that Konami could perhaps make in terms of, improving on the communication side of things, at least specific to the ban list. And you can certainly check out that tweet and kind of contribute there, or maybe in the comments in the video. Definitely really looking forward to your thoughts in terms of, what might be changed. And also, of course, I want to highlight that, as players, we're not all completely off the hook either, because there's definitely been some comments online made towards Konami that are in the very unacceptable level as well. So hopefully we can improve on that front as well. Anyways, in terms of some of the suggested changes, whether on Twitter or whether with my friends or even just myself that I try to gather, the very first one that really comes, of course, is sort of the set date, having a set date for this ban list, right? I mean, we used to have it, it'd be every 6 months they'd have a set date, and then they moved towards having sort of this, the list will come no sooner than, and then they'd give a specific date, and it essentially meant that from that date, moving forward, it was fair game that the ban list could drop. And then as of let's say a couple years ago, they sort of moved towards being more vague and just saying that, the list will come out a few months from now. So, on one hand, I get it. They want to be flexible in terms of, when they release the ban list, they want to be flexible in terms of when the next list might come out, because let's say some events happen, maybe things don't go the way that they had expected it to go, or maybe, the format seems fine and we don't actually need a list for another little bit. So I get that. And also, of course, when you give this sort of vague time range of when the ban list might come out, as we've seen on a lot of social media, a lot of the players tend to kind of spam Konami with a lot of posts, which I'm sure they're not too fond of either. And honestly, as a side, I'm not really sure if they're going to provide us sort of this vague time range anymore, just because of how that's been going. So now, as I mentioned, I understand that when they release the ban list, I get that they would not want to give out the time range of when the next list might come out. But at the same time, could they not, let's say a few months later down the line, could they not, once they kind of have a better sense of when they can release the ban list, could they just give the exact date at that point, right? Just sort of what we've seen now in terms of they actually announced that it will come out on August 31st. Obviously, it was a bit of a short notice with 2 days left, but still, it was something, right? And this really helps in the case where, let's say you have something like a YCS level event coming up and you don't actually know if whatever the ban list is going to come into effect for that event. It really affects, how they prepare for the event, and also whether it's worth investing the money to go, right? And we've seen this many times where actually the list, they do actually release it, they put it into effect before that big event, and it's just a mad scramble for these players traveling to get cards in time, especially when they're in a foreign country, for example. And you know what, I get it, most of us, including myself, we're not at that kind of level where we're traveling for YCS events, but even at a regional level event, a lot of players, they might be driving hours, right? And it would definitely be nice to know if there was a set date in terms of, when the ban list is going to come out and when it takes into effect, so that we can at least better prepare for this game. And on one hand, maybe Konami finds it advantageous to, for example, keep that date discreet so that players will still keep going to these events, because, for example, if they announce that it's going to come out at this specific date, maybe the week leading up to it, no one bothers going to those events because it's sort of irrelevant format, quote unquote. But at the same time, I think for the satisfaction of the player base perspective, I do think that, of course, we would like a set time frame. And now some people also mention, having a more frequent ban list at times. And so for the most part, it seems like they usually follow roughly every 3 months. Very rarely, for example, the only recent memory is where it was shorter than that was, let's say, during Tier 0 format. They actually released it around 2 months from the previous list, where they essentially only hit orange to 1. They put defissured to 3. It was a very minimal list. They didn't really do anything, to be honest with you. But, something like that where they don't always have to try to stick to a 3-month time frame. Because let's say with, this current list, we're actually 4+ months now, and there's, I think, arguably it would have been nice to have a list sooner, especially when Snake Eye has been just dominating for so long as well. Of course, we can't have a list that's too frequent either, because at that point no one would really want to invest into a top meta deck if it's going to get hit every month. So I'm not saying that, of course, but I do think perhaps there is some room where, the list could maybe come out a little bit more frequently, at least every now and then. Now, another thing related to the time frame of the ban list is just the time between when the ban list comes out and when it actually comes into effect. So, previously it used to actually come into effect pretty soon. Let's say if it came out on Friday, it would just come into effect the following Monday. I remember one time a few years ago, it actually came into effect, actually multiple times, it came into effect the same day it was announced. Now, post-COVID, I understand, there's definitely, especially certain regions, it's going to be harder for some players to access the cards in time, and it's not fair to them either. I do hope that maybe we can just keep it 1 week maximum. for example, would be a nice start, because lately it's been sometimes longer than that. I've done a recent data video on that for the last ban list as well. And also, it doesn't really make sense to me that they would announce this on a Saturday, by the way, when presumably that's when regionals are happening. So it really affects attendance for that. Could they not have announced it a little sooner and then, you know, have it into effect for that weekend before the event comes out? You know, a lot of hype. For example, I have a Toronto regional this Sunday. I'm not even sure I'm going to go anymore, because if this list is being announced Saturday, it's obviously most likely not going to come into effect for the Sunday. So kind of really bizarre in that respect. The other suggested change that came up a lot among Twitter, or like my friends, for example, just like explanations for, you know, the reasoning for the change on the list, right? I think this can be a little tricky though. I mean, on one hand, it's actually been done before. Actually, pretty recently, I remember there was one article for some of the changes for the ban list. And also Anthony on Twitter kind of highlighted an article for, I assume, Wizards of the Coast, because I think they're the one that handles Magic. I don't know anything about that game, but I did briefly take a glimpse at their article. They were very thorough actually in terms of their ban list, why they made those changes. They gave examples of like tournament play, for example, and what they sort of like to do design wise, and, you know, why they made those changes, which would be on one hand nice to have for Konami, for example. On the other hand, the reason why I say it's a little tricky is that, you know, for one, obviously there are some changes made on the ban list that seem to be more business related in terms of promoting purchase for new product. I don't think I'm out of line for saying that. I think a clear example that I can remember is, let's say, when Salamangreat was first sort of a very good deck that came out, Lady Debug got limited just around the time that Cyanide Mining was about to come out, which were kind of similar cards, at least especially with the card pool that was available at the time, and that felt really like a business move to a lot of us, right? So because of that, for example, I would assume it would be a kind of, obviously Konami's not going to explicitly say, oh, the reason we changed this card or banned this card is because we want you to buy this other new product, right? They're not going to do that. So I would assume the sort of these explanations would not be 100% truthful, right? And I don't know how Magic, for example, handles that side of things when it comes to their ban list explanations. I also heard that with like Duel Links, they apparently get like some explanations for the ban list, but usually it ends up being pretty generic, like, you know, hits the consistency and things like that. So I definitely get the need for rather interest in players wanting like an explanation. I think it would still be kind of nice to have, and especially when it comes to sort of like a design aspect of things that Konami doesn't really seem to explain to us anyways, and just in terms of how they want the game to sort of progress and everything. But you know what, I'm not sure about this one. Another thing that came up is sort of, you know, what if they reveal the ban list through, let's say, like a live stream, or let's say at least like a video like they do with like the product set reveals. And I think one thing that immediately sort of jumped for me with that suggestion is something that, you know, in terms of the financial aspects of things, you know, obviously if they're going to post a video, they are going to want at least some form of good quality, which involves financial costs that, you know what, perhaps they may not see as worth it. And not to mention, if it's going to be a video, then obviously they're probably going to have to explain some of the card choices on why that's being hit. And we sort of circle back to some of the concerns that I mentioned earlier in the previous bullet. Someone also did mention whether, you know, what if like content creators actually reveal the ban list, sort of how they do with like the early product reveals. And as Raphael mentioned, I think a concern with that could be, you know, obviously if these players who are content creators, if they get to know the ban list in advance, you know, that could kind of cause some potential issues with like the secondary market, right? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I swear I thought I saw the OCG hold something that almost looked like a press conference when it came to like ban list announcements. And so maybe I'm imagining that, or maybe I thought I saw it, or maybe they don't do it all that often if they do it. If you are familiar with how the OCG does it, definitely let me know in the comments. But, you know, if they do actually do it that way, then perhaps it's not too far-fetched for Konami to do something similar in the future. And then in terms of other suggested changes, I'm really looking forward to what you guys might have in the comments down below. I mean, for me, I think another thing I'd like to mention that is just when it comes to like very obvious, generic, problematic cards and how long they tend to take to hit them. So, and I get it, some cards aren't obvious as it is to some people, right? For example, to me, Shifter seems like an obvious card that you would want to ban. But for a lot of players, they'll see it as a necessary evil. But I'm talking about like, at least what I believe are truly really obvious hits. Let's say, for example, like VFD, or let's say Artifact Scythe, things like that, where it's clearly a very big issue. It just promoted, like you just could not play, and they just let it run, as in Konami. They did not hit it for far too long, and they should have hit it a lot sooner. And those are kind of perplexing to me, just things that are just makes the game very unfun to play, and that they don't hit it right away. I mean, of course, there are sometimes some cards where, you know, we as players cry about it and they don't hit it, and eventually over time it ends up being a non-issue, right? For example, Saryuja, I remember in 2019, everyone wanted that card banned. Or let's say if we want to go archetype specific, like anything in the Alistair Invoke package, people really wanted at least like a limit to at least one of those cards in that package. They never did it. It ended up being completely fine, and no one plays those cards anymore. I get that, although you could also argue maybe, hey, at least at that time you still could have hit it, and then eventually over time you could have just brought it back. So I think that for me is one. There's definitely a lot of other cards that I won't even bother mentioning, just in case maybe it's not actually as obvious as I think it is, but there are some generic cards that I think really could be hit sooner. Now, when it comes to archetype specific cards, I get it. It's not actually that straightforward in terms of what to ban. Sometimes we get these really far off cards in a specific deck that got hit that we thought another card would be hit instead. And because, obviously there's a lot of intertwining factors where if you hit one deck, you have to account for whatever the next best deck that might pop up, and you have to sort of hit regarding that. So I get that, but when it comes to more generic, sort of specific, problematic, toxic cards, I do hope that they would sort of hit them sooner. Anyways, guys, that was it for my rant. I get it, just another person crying about the ban list. But, again, I really look forward to hearing your thoughts in terms of what you think could be improved. Maybe you don't think there's any changes required at all from Konami's end regarding the ban list. But, again, really looking forward to creating a healthy discussion here. But anyways, big thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to those on Twitter, my friends that also contributed as part of this video. And, well, take care, guys.